watching Morning at NTV.
A very good morning. Welcome from the discussion about the World Environment Day and of course the impetus that is designed to ensure that the world deals with the effects of climate change, especially with regard to the world of plastics. That conversation is done. Now we are heading into our Kickstarter, Eradicating Child Labor in Uganda. That is ahead of the World Day Against Child Labor that is due to be commemorated next Monday. I'll be introducing the guests from the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, as well as one from the Legal Aid Clinic at the Law Development Centre very shortly. But let's first understand what is at stake. A survey conducted by the Uganda Bureau of Statistics in 2021 indicated that the largest share of child labour is prevalent in the agriculture sector, where children are employed as unpaid family workers. 19.5% of those are in rural areas and are engaged in child labour compared to 11% in urban areas. And the challenge is not only in Uganda, these economic hardships are spread elsewhere. Across countries like Tanzania, children are taken to gold mines and are deeply embedded in mineral extraction, also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The conversation is needed now and yesterday. Joining me to help us understand what is at stake and what plans are underway by the various stakeholders is Ismael Kalanda, the Principal Labour Officer, Inspections and Focal Point Person on Child Labour in the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Many thanks for joining us, Mr. Kalanda.
Thank you.
Joining us too, Teddy Namugga, a Legal Officer at the Law Development Centre Legal Aid Clinic. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
First and foremost, let me ask the Principal Labour Officer in charge of inspections and focal point person on child labour at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. When we hear child labour, some of us do not quickly connect the implications. We assume because it's happening elsewhere, not within our circles, then we think it's not a problem or it's not as urgent as it ought to be. What is at stake and what is the state of affairs?
Yeah, first of all, child labour. This is work that deprives children of their childhood. It deprives them of their potential and dignity, and it's harmful to their physical development. Yeah, when children, instead of going to school, they are working somewhere in a shamba, it means it interrupts with their education. In Uganda, child labour is still a big problem. And when you analyze the problem of child labour in Uganda, it's really a big problem. First of all, we know that the biggest percentage of our population is a young population in Uganda. Actually, more than half of the population of Uganda is below 15 years, and 78% of the population is below the age of 30. And 49.7% of the Ugandans are in this working age they were part of the working age population. And since 2016, we are seeing an increase in the levels of child labour in Uganda. When UBOS conducted the National Labour Force Survey in 2016, child labour was at 14%. And the next assessment done before March 20th, it was at 22%. Then after March 20th, it had increased to 28.2%. And the latest reports are all indicating that child labour is at 40%. So there is a sharp rise, and as you are aware, it's mainly because of the COVID-19. You know, that caused a lot of economic stress,
disruptions,
economic stress, school closures. They all impacted on the learning of these children, and many of them were forced into child labor. So it's still a big problem, and we realize that more males, more boys than the girls, are engaged in child labor. And when we go to regions, Karamoja is the highest, we all know. where child labor is at 56%. Then we have Lango, where it's at 52%. So child labor is still a big problem, and the government has to undertake a lot of activities to ensure that we control it, or we even eliminate it.
Okay, that's a very good overview of the state of affairs. But when you consider what is at stake, children across the country find themselves in very hard and, well, sometimes confusing situations where they are heading families as a result of either being abandoned or parents dying or parents not being present for many reasons. What laws right now govern child labor? Is it something that is enshrined within the Constitution that in case or in circumstances where a child finds themselves having to work, what are the modalities of that? Or it's completely illegal and we have no space for that?
Yeah, actually, government has really put up a legal framework to control child labor. First of all, we have the ILO conventions, the international conventions, and these guide us to, we domesticate them.
That's right.
We domesticate them into our local laws. And as of now, the laws are very clear, because we all know that in Uganda, the working age is 14 years.
14 and above.
Yeah, 14 and above.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we know at least by the time someone gets 14, we assume this person has gone through the basic education, which is primary level.
That's
so
right.
at 14, someone is allowed to work, however, just under certain conditions. And below 12, a child is not supposed to work.
Okay.
A child can only be engaged in some light, simple work, majorly for learning purposes, but not for monetary gain.
Not for monetary
and
gain.
Yeah, and all these things are embedded in our laws in Uganda. Currently, we have the National Child Labor Policy of 2006. By the way, most of these laws, we are reviewing them at the moment. Like you are aware, we have been reviewing the Employment Act, which has gone through Parliament. We are currently reviewing the Employment of Children regulations. These were for 2012, and we are reviewing them. We have the Employment regulations. These are for 2011. We are also reviewing them. We have we are also ratifying these conventions. We currently, with the two critical conventions, we have the Convention 182 on worst forms of child labor. We have Convention 183 on minimum age. Those ones we have already ratified them. And the process we are undertaking now is also ratifying the ones on occupational safety and health in agriculture. This is Convention 184. And also the 155 on general occupational safety and health. So all these are some of the strategies we are doing to strengthen the legal framework that we use to eliminate child labor.
Okay, thank you for that very comprehensive overview. I specifically stayed with Mr. Kalanda so that we could get to understand fully the state of affairs and what is at stake. When it comes to the legal perspective, you're fighting for child rights, so to speak. But before we get to the point where rights are an issue, what are you dealing with when it comes to child labor? What are the cases that are prevalent? How are they being handled? And what could you identify as the greatest cause of this kind of situation for us?
Well, thank you very much. The Legal Aid Clinic, in the bid to fight child labor, we're working under a partnership. So since September 2020, we have been working on the enhancing access to justice for children in Uganda. So this fight particularly is in partnership with USAID and the Freedom House. And as Legal Aid Clinic, we are part of a subgroup, justice subgroup, whereby we don't work independently.
That's right.
We work with FIDA Uganda, Uganda Child Rights NGO Network. We work with FCU, among other organizations. So in a bid to identify and see how we can fight child labor in Uganda, we operate in about 11 districts. some of the things that we do from the legal aspect to see that these children access legal aid services include mobile legal aid clinics. We have foot soldiers who are in these various districts. They help us identify as well as educate these communities about child labor. Now, your question was how are we able to identify and which cases are most prevalent? Most of the prevalent cases are children who we have parents in villages sending them off to work. Now, most of the times these parents are ignorant as to what they're doing. I don't know, perhaps maybe because it's because of the poverty, and then they neglect their duty, parental responsibility to cater for these children. So you find a mother or a father actually sending off the child to Kampala or to some far place to earn a living to actually support the family. Now you realize this pushes the child out of school.
That's right.
Most of these children are in agriculture businesses. Some of what Mr. Kalanda said constitutes some of the worst forms of child labor, working in the agriculture business, mining business, and the most prevalent we see is Karamajong children being sent off to Kampala. Some of them come willingly, but then we realize that they're
part of a scheme by some older persons.
Yes, we realize that they're vending on the streets. Some of them are sold in open air markets. They sell a child as though they're selling a commodity. So how we handle this is we go down to these villages and try to educate, because if these people are not empowered with what is legal and what is not, they're not going to be able to fight for the rights of their children.
That's right.
Other cases include prostitution. They traffic children for sex exploitation. For example, in the Rwenzori region, I don't know if people are aware, where children are rearing cattle. We have in Karamoja, where children are working in gold mines. Some of these are classified, as Mr. Kalanda said, as worst forms of child labor. Now, in most cases, when we identify these cases, it is the mother who's going to come to us, or the father saying, oh, this employer is not paying my child. But then we enlighten them that actually what you're doing by sending this child off,
shouldn't even be seeking pay.
They shouldn't be seeking pay as well. So from the legal aspect as of now, prosecution, we identify and prosecute. We also help resettle these children who have been trafficked for work. We have social workers and legal officers to say that we resettle these various children back to their families.
Okay. You make a revelation about open air markets and the sale of children into labor. And this one indicates that you're pretty much aware where this is happening. I don't know whether the ministry and government on that part and knows about open air markets. This is literally slave trade happening under our very own nose. Do you have an idea where that is happening and what is being done to ensure that those that are responsible for this kind of trade are apprehended?
Yeah, actually, as government, we have not really come to that. We have not encountered it. However, we mainly, some of these practices are mainly in Karamoja area, and we are doing again a number of sensitizations in Karamoja. We have specific emphasis, especially with the partners. And when it comes even to child trafficking, we see most of it is in this area of Karamoja. And this is where we have maneuver programs. We've worked with the partners to come up with the ordinances. We have made a number of inspections in those areas. Yeah, but
maybe let's just stick with the revelation that Miss Teddy Namugga makes. For purposes of people watching out there, we need to understand how this is happening, because it's important. If the government is not on the ground as it ought to be, and this one is a little bit of a very sticking point on the part of government, have you encountered a market where these children are being traded? Have you seen it? Has it been reported factually?
Well, open air markets have been reported factually. This revelation has been coming up with the Karamajong children that we interface with on the streets. There was a bid for KCCA to have them off the streets. Now, as you're working with these children and our social workers are trying to have them open up to how they go to Kampala, they'll tell you, oh, in my village, they round us up and tell us whoever wants to go to Kampala, this is what you have to do. And then before they are to give this child to the vendor, they ask you, for the child this age, this is how much you're going to pay. And for the child this age, this is how much you're going to pay. So these children actually open up to the social workers and they actually tell you that this is actually how I came about to be in Kampala, and this is how much I was paid for, or this is how much my colleague was paid for.
Talking about access to justice, this year's theme, the global theme for the World Day Against Child Labor, is social justice for all and child labor. When it comes to accessing justice, it's something that is already hard for the adults in this country. And it's wide-ranging. It's a result of so many reasons. Now the child who is not being brought or being attended to by either a CBO, that is a community-based organization, or even an CSO, how does the guarantee of justice come about for the child who is in far-flung areas of this country, whose parents cannot even distinguish between what is child labor and engaging in practice that ought to teach the child how to survive? If a child wakes up in the morning, I can say this with pride, we used to work. You wake up in the morning and you know your roles, and this would go on until up to 15 plus. You even go to the garden and you're able to do the class, whatever you have to do in the garden. That was seen as part of the home setting. Today, in the eyes of another person, it could be seen as child labor. What is the distinction?
Actually, the International Labour Organization makes a distinction between normal activities that the child has to do for their development so that they can become a responsible member of society, vis-a-vis child labor and worse forms of child labor. Now, if the activities that you're engaging this child in are not damaging them physically, mentally, or they're not harmful to their welfare generally, if these activities are not having this child drop out of school, or we are seeing this child working for long hours and having to still go to school while working those long hours, now you have to assess and see that actually this is on the borderline of child labor. Now, for example, I personally in holidays would go to the farm and work, but that
and you're told if you don't go to the farm, next term's fees won't come by.
Yes, but
so in a way you're working for your fees.
You will basically, but it still helps this child know that you have to be hardworking. I am not dropping out of school. We're still given time to do our homework and all. But if these activities are turning towards this child having to drop out of school, this child has to go to school in the morning but still come back home and work late hours, we see it is damaging them physically.
Perhaps within the framework that you talked about earlier, Mr. Kalanda, the cultural aspect of work seems to, there is no clear-cut distinction between what is work or labor.
Yeah, this one is clear, like she has explained. First of all, the definition is very clear. It should be work that does not interrupt with the child's development. First of all, it should
That is on paper. When you are in Namaingo and the child is going into the rocks to help in the quarry, a parent doesn't quickly want to be told that this is the line and you should not cross it.
So then it becomes an illegality, obviously, and we have to come in. Because we all know that the child's place is school. However, we had the other question we had asked Madam Namugga. We are in Karamoja, we read the KCCA is working with the Minister of Gender. And we have the Koblin Rehabilitation Center.
Koblin?
Yeah, Koblin. It is a transit center. When they withdraw these children, they keep them at Koblin and they prepare them for resettlement. And maybe we need to interrogate the issue further, but as of now we know KCC and Minister of Gender, we already have staff there who are already in Karamoja and already working on this issue of handling these children that are brought back to Kampala, and if we was possible, we have the statistics of how many children they withdraw. Although the challenge is that sometimes they withdraw, then others come here, but it's been managed somehow. Yeah, then this issue of child labor, like she has explained, of course, there may be some weaknesses in enforcement, but it does not make it right. If the parent is taking the child to a gold mine when the child is supposed to be at school. That is why in many of these areas we have come up with ordinances. Like I told you, in the areas of Karamoja in eastern Uganda, the partners have supported us, and we have come up with ordinances that ensure that at this and this time children are supposed to be at school. If you are not at school, then the laws are supposed to come to work.
Okay, that's very interesting. The topic is as wide and also a little bit sticky at certain points, especially when it comes to how to enforce. Let me just return to the legal aspects of this. When you are trying to counter the challenges that many communities face in Uganda, first and foremost, on the economic conditions, poverty is rampant, to the extent that debates like child labor are not even something some communities are willing to embrace, because they're like, hey, we need to survive. I do not know whether within the workings of the Legal Aid Clinic you also have interventions that are aimed not only at offering the legal services in order for them to access justice, but to help them get along. Is that your mandate?
We work in partnerships. So if I were to identify a case of child labor as a legal personnel, we have partners. Like I said, representing the subgroup on access to justice. However, we have other partners. We've seen other organizations. If LDC cannot offer that economic support to the parents or to the family of the child, we could refer to other sister organizations like Action Aid.
Okay.
Yes.
So what within this, what does Action Aid do? Does it provide option for school? Do they provide the parents? I don't know how to even say. Do they provide the parents a new way of doing things in terms of support, so that they actually able to hire other people other than children?
You see, with child labor and all other laws and rights of children, it all has to start with empowerment with the law.
Yeah.
So you empower them with the law of this is right, this is not right. But you assess the status, economic status of the family or of a particular community, as well as taking into account the cultural aspects of a particular community. You're not going to just come and apply a blanket resolution, or this community, you're not supposed to do A, B, C, D. So as we go in for these interventions, we have to partner with other organizations, for example, FIDA, Action Aid, or shelters, to see to it that if legal aid can provide legal representation, of course we also have social workers as well to deal with the counseling of the parents and the local leaders of the community. But we also refer to those other organizations who might not necessarily be under the access to justice subgroup, but we know can empower the parents economically, can help them start small businesses. I know for a fact that FIDA does that as well.
All right, we shall be tackling what is coming up in as far as the day is concerned, what is lined up in terms of government activities and intervention. But before we do that, let me bring in the aspect of tech. Today, technology is virtually determining so many things, to the extent that even children who are going to kindergarten are accessing tabs and are able to do a lot of things when it comes to tech. In China and other economies, you find 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds being able to play around with these gadgets and for economic value. I do not know whether within the framework that the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development has as government, we are considering ability of children who are using tech to go into the labor circle. And when they go in, how do they earn? Or how are they protected from being exploited? Because, for example, if you have a 7-year-old who is a genius at tech and has come up with these very innovative ways of doing things, when do you define that? Because at that point he's learning a lot, but it is labor, and somebody is exploiting his knowledge, his or her knowledge. I don't know whether this has been captured.
I think as the Minister of Gender, we have not reached that level.
You haven't?
Yeah, but I think we have the Minister of ICT, which can come up with frameworks to regulate such occurrences. Then we can also have other ministries, and but as the Minister of Gender, you know, what I can say is most of these laws of ours have taken time. Like I told you,
are they obsolete?
Yeah, of course, some. We are reviewing them.
Okay.
Like I told you, the National Child Labour Policy was of 2006. Then
That's not too far. 2006, we had already adopted some of the technologies that are available.
And like I told you, we began with the Principal Act, the Employment Act, and we are reviewing all of them. And I think as we do consultations, such issues, when they come up, we can integrate them into the laws.
Okay.
Yes.
It will be very important. The Legal Aid Clinic, what is the space or the place of tech in child labor? First and foremost, to bring this point home a little bit in a better way, tech facilitates trafficking, because these children begin to get to know so many things and so many spaces through which to make money across borders, and would want, for example, to be part of what is the other end, and they are quickly integrated into the system. Do we have a tech imperative to your work?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, tech is just like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It could be used by the perpetrators, but we have to go to the basics of what are the very basics of child labor.
Okay.
Is it hard work? Is it light work? If it's being done under supervision, it would be legal. But if it's tending towards the worst forms of child labor, but in my opinion, I don't think tech would tend towards the worst forms of child labor. So if this is a tech genius and someone is exploiting the talent for the betterment of this child, in my opinion, if it is supervised and falls under light work, it definitely would pass.
All right, that's a debate that can be talked about, or rather exploited a little bit more. When it comes to exploitation of children, there are so many people who are doing this and are going scot-free. I do not know what punishments are in place. Right now we have the sexual exploitation for children who are even as young as 8. What is the legal framework right now? And do we have any cases? Because for us, we are Ugandans and we are Africans. If we've not heard of anyone paying for such a crime, then we begin to think that people are getting away with it, especially those that have the money.
Yeah.
You know, who has been identified in the last 1 year, and what is being done about exploitation for sex?
Well, we have various laws that have punishments for sexual exploitation. We have the Penal Code Act. We also have the Trafficking in Persons Act.
Okay.
Now, what the law does, it makes a distinction between punishments. If the victim is a child, that becomes an aggravated offense, of which your punishment is death. So we see the gravity in the nature of punishments for these persons, especially if you're defiling a child who's below 13 years, that becomes aggravated defilement, and definitely your punishment is higher. Now, have we had any cases in Uganda? Yes, we've had cases in Uganda, although documentation is still a challenge.
Still a challenge.
Yes. Very few people know about the mandate of the ICD, International Crimes Division, but they prosecute cases of worst forms of trafficking in persons, organized cartel, although the public mainly knows them for terrorism, but yes, there is that division as well. Yes.
All right, so I think that information has to be outed a little bit more aggressively, so that
and maybe to add to that, we also have the regulations, the sexual harassment regulations. We call them the employment bracket sexual harassment regulations. So I think they are of 2012.
Okay.
And when it comes to the employment matters, the employers also have to come up with administrative policies, and they are supposed to have sexual harassment regulations, sexual harassment policies at the workplace. That one is a must. And as the ministry, we mainly come in the administrative and the civil part of it, where but in most cases these matters, when they are criminal, then the police comes in and
okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go into the final bend of this discussion. I would ask you to, I don't know which question to pose on this particular issue of maids in homes, but that is the umbrella issue that I've put to you. You find what to tell us about maids in homes, because many are below 14. And then Mr. Kalanda will tell us more about what is going to be happening on Monday, what events we have lined up, and what could be coming up right after. Please begin.
Most of the maids in our domestic homes are actually children, and people are, whether unknowingly or knowingly, employing them. Viewers out there, if you're employing a child below the age of 14, that is classified under child labor. And heads of households should also be aware that if a child is being defiled under your household, it is also a criminal offense. So we have to be vigilant. We have to be vigilant and careful. You know, some of us have this tendency of saying, bring me the young one, that is the one who will be able to manage my home. But it is actually illegal to have a child below the age of 14 in our homes. It is classified as one of the worst forms of child labor under the laws that Uganda has ratified, and we've also domesticated the same in the Children's Act. And if found, it is you'll be punished for your actions, whether you knew it or you did not know, because ignorance is not a defense under the law.
Who is looking for these cases? Are you going into people's houses? How are you finding out who is employing?
We actually, as LDC-Legal Aid Clinic, we actually have fit persons. These are members of the community who we train to identify.
All right. Lastly, we have 60 broadcasting seconds.
Yeah, we on the issue of domestic workers.
The day on Monday.
Yeah, the day actually.
Where shall we be? And just perhaps again take us through the theme quickly.
Yeah, the day will be celebrated on Monday, 12th June 2023. And this time we shall be indoors. We shall be at Sheraton Kampala Hotel.
Okay.
And today's theme is social justice for all, end child labor. And we are actually rotating around the issues of social justice, where there is where we need fair treatment and equal access to socio-economic services. Because we realize that if everyone can have equal and adequate access to social services, the public services, then it is one of the biggest solutions to ending child labor.
Okay.
And on that day, we shall have a live coverage of the day on NTV, and we shall have a speech from the minister. We shall have a panel discussion. We shall also have several statements from the workers, the employers, ILO, and the partners. However, lastly, we also want to thank our partners who have been so supportive, the International Labour Organization, the Uganda Child NGO Network.
All right.
Yeah, we also have Work No Child is Business platform for labor action.
They seem to be very many, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. All the partners, many thanks. I would like to thank you, Teddy Namugga, Legal Officer, LDC, Legal Aid Clinic, and Ismael Kalanda, Principal Labour Officer, Inspections and Focal Person on Child Labour at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Thanks for the discussion. That will do it for the Kickstarter.
You're watching Morning at NTV.